I'm Daryl Gibson. I was married to Sheila, who I thought was amazing. We had what I believed were 24 blissful years together, but it turns out only the first 21 were truly happy. Then, out of the blue, Sheila decided to end things. Apparently she had been seeing this guy named Jeff Woods for the last 3 years. And yeah, they weren't just talking, they were falling in love and having an affair. Now I'm a grown man, so if she didn't want to be with me anymore, then fine, she could go. But life goes on. The real pain set in when I discovered that my 3 kids, Jason, Michael, and Kimberly, knew about the whole thing all along. They knew about the affair and that their mom was planning to leave me, but they didn't tell me because they didn't want to get caught in the middle. Essentially, they chose to side with their mom and kept me in the dark. Bitter doesn't even begin to cover how I felt. But instead of wallowing in it, I decided to buy a boat and started sailing. I did a bit of charter work here and there, but mostly I just drifted around. This became my life for 7 years. Then, out of nowhere, my daughter Kimberly called me. She told me that her mom needed a favor. Sheila had a new daughter named Karen, and they wanted me to get tested to see if I could donate a kidney. It wasn't hard to figure out what that meant, and just in case I didn't get it, my sons came by to explain it to me like I was some kind of idiot. They made it clear that Sheila was pregnant with my kid when she left me. They knew, and they never said a word. I was disgusted with them for knowing and keeping that from me. So what did I do with all this dumped on me? I decided to take a trip to Bermuda and get away from it all. I was getting ready to set sail when Sheila suddenly appeared. I'd already pulled up the anchor and was drifting away from the dock when she ran up and jumped onto the boat. The boat was about 7 feet away from the pier when I decided to cut the engines. I was just about to throw her overboard when I noticed a little girl standing on the dock, calling out for her mom. I told Sheila to get off my boat, and I wasn't exactly polite about it. But instead of leaving, Sheila pulled out a pair of handcuffs and locked herself to one of the mooring points. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Daryl, I know you're furious with me, but Karen needs your help. She'll die without a kidney. Please don't let your anger at me hurt her. I know you're upset, but you're a better person than that." For a moment, I just stared at her, and then I burst out laughing. "Oh, so now you think I'm a good man? I'm only good enough when you need something from me? Huh? But I wasn't good enough for you to stay with." From the dock, the little girl screamed, "Mommy!" Sheila shouted back, "It's okay, honey. Mommy's fixing things." A dark laugh bubbled up inside me, and without saying another word, I pushed the throttle forward. "Daryl, what are you doing?" Sheila yelled. "I'm heading to Bermuda," I replied casually. "I plan to make a stop in St. Thomas first. Thanks for tagging along. I see you packed light. But what about Karen?" she pleaded. "And who's Karen exactly?" I asked, acting clueless. "I don't know anyone by that name. I've never met a Karen. I never got to fix her bike or kiss her goodnight." "She's your daughter," Sheila shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. "Funny, I don't recognize her." I shot back. "You see, I remember my kids because I was there to raise them. Though judging by how they turned out, I didn't do the best job. I'll chalk that up to your influence." Sheila, clearly distressed, asked, "What do you want?" By this time, we had made it into the channel and were heading out toward open sea. I noticed that a few more people had gathered on the dock with the little girl. I couldn't see clearly, but I guessed it was my old family. I waved at them with a bit of irony. "Daryl, you need to turn back," Sheila begged, panic in her voice. I grabbed my Android and started fiddling with it, trying to get the voice recorder app up and running. Of course, I hadn't bothered to read the manual for something as trivial as that, so it took me a few minutes to figure it out. Meanwhile, Sheila was in the background talking nonstop. "Daryl, are you even paying attention to me?" she asked, clearly frustrated. "I think I finally got the app to work." "Not really. Could you say that again?" I replied, more out of habit than actual interest. "Daryl, we need to talk about saving Karen's life. Didn't you see how she barely made it to the end of the pier?" Sheila pleaded. "Sheila, unlock yourself and get off my boat," I said, though by now we were nearly 2 miles away from the dock. It was more of a formality at this point. She just smiled and said, "We can't do that. Jason has the only key and he's back at the dock, so you have a choice. Either go back and help my daughter or I like the sound of or I interrupted as I pushed the throttle to pick up speed. Honestly, I was in a bit of a dilemma. On one hand, I really wanted Sheila off my boat. On the other hand, I wasn't in the mood to be guilt-tripped or pressured by a bunch of people who had abandoned me and pushed me out of their lives. If I cut off her hand, I'd probably get in trouble and it would make a mess on my deck. If I chopped the mooring point, it would damage the boat, which I didn't like either. Plus, I didn't think she was worth the $1,500 a life raft would cost. While she kept talking, I was still weighing the cost of my peace and quiet against the expense of a lifeboat. But then, my daydreaming was abruptly interrupted by the Coast Guard showing up. Being someone who generally follows the rules, I decided to stop the boat. I mean, it's not like I had much of a choice. They had a chain gun mounted on their bow for crying out loud. They sent over a Zodiac raft filled with a bunch of serious-looking guys in uniform. I quickly stashed my Android in a storage bin under some charts in the deckhouse. Without even asking, they all climbed aboard my boat. The guy in charge asked, "What's going on here?" Before I could say anything, Sheila jumped in with, "Thank God you're here, he's kidnapping me." She even rattled her handcuffs at them for effect. The officer looked at me and asked, "Sir, is this true?" "Honestly, I'm pretty glad you're here too," I replied. "If we can figure out how to get her off my boat, you can take her with you." "And no, I didn't kidnap her." The officer sighed. "Sir, it would be a lot easier if you just gave us the keys and explained what's happening." "I don't have the keys," I said, feeling more frustrated by the second. This crazy woman jumped on my boat and handcuffed herself too. I trailed off as I saw the look on their faces and realized how ridiculous my story sounded. Without another word, I turned around and offered my wrists for the cuffs. And let me tell you, those cuffs hurt when they slapped them on. These boarding team guys live for this kind of stuff, just like SWAT teams. I'm pretty sure one of them got a little too excited. At least they didn't slam my face into the deck. Being treated like a kidnapper made me feel like a celebrity. I did make sure they searched me to prove I didn't have the keys. But my day wasn't over in terms of humiliation. The bosun's mate in charge had one of his men grab a screwdriver and release Sheila by unscrewing the mooring point from the deck. Why didn't I think of that? Sheila just sat there smirking at me. "Now you have to come back," she said smugly. "You're going to regret this," I muttered. Not my most original line, but I was feeling pretty lousy at the moment. There were a ton of questions thrown my way, but I decided to lawyer up and was taken into custody. The arraignment was coming up fairly quickly when I got a visit from someone I fully expected. Sheila walked in and said, "Look, let's just move past all of this. If you donate your kidney, we can go back to our lives. You'll have done an amazing, heroic thing. My daughter will survive. And maybe we can see this as a chance to reconnect. I know we treated you really badly, but maybe..." She nervously licked her lips and squeezed her husband's hand. "Maybe we could even invite you over for Christmas?" She looked at him, and he nodded with that smug, condescending attitude. It was interesting to see how suddenly one of my organs made me a bit less of an outcast in their eyes. I couldn't help but think that if I offered up my testicles, maybe they'd even consider inviting me to Thanksgiving. "Here's an idea," I said. "How about we wait until my trial? You know how long that could take. No judge is going to force me to give up a kidney while I'm in jail. Enjoy your night. Unless, of course, I just plead guilty to a lesser charge. Wonder if I'd get 7 years. Their faces turned pale as I got up to leave, and they started pounding on the glass partition, desperate for me to reconsider. Oddly enough, I had a lawyer in no time. "Hello, Mr. Gibson. I'm Matthew Hughes, and I'll be representing you." "Oh, so are you a public defender?" I asked, a bit suspicious. No, he replied. "Mr. and Mrs. Woods are covering my fees." "Right, but are you my lawyer or theirs?" "Well, that's a bit of a complicated issue," he said, trying to sound diplomatic. "Not really," I shot back. "If you're my lawyer, I want a notarized letter confirming that you represent me. Also, I'm not agreeing to your representation unless those 2 idiots prepay you a hefty retainer. I don't want to end up with you quitting halfway through because they decided not to foot the bill anymore." He thought it over for just a moment. "That works. It's a tricky situation they've put me in, but this might clear up the ethical concerns." I couldn't help but think that the promise of a big retainer played just as much a role in his decision as his ethics did. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but it crossed my mind. You'll have the paperwork by tomorrow, he said. The night before I was set to be released on bail, and no, I didn't have to pay a single cent. I found myself in my cell, reflecting deeply on who I was and the kind of person I wanted to become. Was I the type of person who could just walk away while someone was in desperate need? I didn't like to think so. But when it came to my family, well, my ex-family, the anger I felt seemed to overshadow any sense of morality. Sheila was right about that. At the same time, it was clear that my family was the kind to abandon someone. When I was the one struggling, they all turned their backs on me. I mean, I wasn't literally drowning, but emotionally, I was struggling to keep my head above water. Despite everything, I knew I could still find some happiness. I just hadn't managed to do so yet. And I recognized that this was a weakness in my character. They would keep pressing me to do the right thing, and I didn't have a solid defense. Was a relatively simple medical procedure worth my daughter's life? I quickly corrected myself. No, not my daughter. As far as our connection went, I was nothing more than a donor, like a cup of sperm from a sperm bank. For a brief moment, I considered the idea of forcing some sort of interaction. After all, she was technically my blood. I could potentially push for visitation rights. I quickly let go of that idea. Even if I found a judge who would agree to it, she would still be stuck in that toxic environment and she'd probably end up resenting me. Then I thought about taking her away from that mess entirely. I could adopt her, take her on adventures around the world with me. It seemed like it would be in her best interest. I started thinking through the details. There was that small cabin next to the master cabin. I could clear out some of my old stuff and make it hers. But then I started to consider all the practicalities. Buying life jackets, cooking for two, not being able to lounge around in my underwear anymore. What if she fell overboard? She seemed like a curious kid and I could easily get distracted. And what about her education? Would I have to homeschool her? Could I even do that from a boat? It would take up a lot of time I currently enjoyed spending fishing and doing other things. Then there was the issue of friends. How could she make friends living on a boat? No, I'd probably have to give up the boat altogether. And then I'd just be a single dad with a girl torn away from her family. If someone did that to me, I'd definitely be resentful. Besides, I didn't have the money to outdo the bribes Sheila's husband could offer. Living on a boat would probably get old pretty fast for a little girl. I sighed. I'd need to give this a lot more thought. As I was leaving with my lawyer, they ambushed me right outside the federal holding facility. "Daryl, we need to talk." Mr. Hughes, my lawyer, quickly stepped back inside the facility, leaving me to deal with them. "Talk? I'm dealing with a federal offense here. I'm not even supposed to be near you since I supposedly kidnapped you. The FBI is involved now and this is on my record." She blushed as she stood there with Jason and Kimberly. "Dad, I told you before you lost the right to call me Dad a long time ago." "Fine. Mr. Gibson," Jason corrected himself. "Karen is getting worse. She's on dialysis now. You need to help her right away. I have to go to court. I have to pay taxes. I might even have to die someday. And just so you know, I tore up my organ donor card and added a clause to my will stating that I'm to be cremated intact, with no organs harvested. Just in case." When I said this, all three of them looked horrified, but I could also see a hint of guilt in their expressions. People like to think they're moral, but desperate times can lead to desperate actions. "How could you even think we'd do something like that?" Kimberly asked, clearly offended. "History," I replied. "You've taken sides before and I know exactly which side you chose." Sheila tried to step in with a more serious tone. "Look, there's a lot of bad history between us. I treated you badly. Okay? I'm sorry. I'll regret what I did for the rest of my life. But it's done. Karen didn't do anything to you, so we all need to act like adults and do what's best for Karen. You know, when people say, let's all act like adults, what they usually mean is, please ignore all the terrible things I did to you." She started to respond, but I gestured for her to stop as Mr. Hughes reappeared with a couple of officers. One of the officers stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, I'm afraid I have to place you under arrest." "What? Why?" Sheila looked at me, confused and panicked. "Daryl, what's going on?" "I believe the official charge is making a false statement to law enforcement." Maybe they'll allow you some visitation rights to see Karen occasionally. Mr. Hughes had played a key role in getting my evidence to the right authorities. I needed to shake things up a bit. Jason started yelling at the officers, and for a moment, it seemed like a fight might break out. Fortunately, Kimberly managed to calm him down, and Mr. Hughes escorted me back to my motel. Just my luck, I ran into them again at the hospital. An attractive nurse was doting on me, which was a nice change considering how things had been the past 7 years. That elusive mermaid still hadn't shown up. "Thank you so much for your generosity," she said with a smile. Kimberly and Sheila just stared at me, then suddenly broke into smiles and rushed toward me. Startled, I quickly stepped behind the nurse for cover. "Mrs. Woods, Miss Gibson, how are you?" The nurse gushed, clearly excited. "Mr. Gibson," she paused for a moment, seeming to think. "Mr. Gibson here just registered himself as a potential kidney donor." She looked between my daughter and me, clearly puzzled. "Are you related? Or is this just a coincidence?" "Yes," Kimberly answered at the same time I said no. Kimberly's smile vanished instantly, and the nurse looked even more confused. "Well, I'll just finish up the paperwork," she said awkwardly, before hurrying away. "This is such a generous thing you're doing," Sheila said, clearly not picking up on the tension. She was desperate, focused only on her daughter. "I'll make sure everyone knows just how big-hearted you are," Kimberly whimpered when she saw the look on my face. "Not really. Thanks to some heavy moral pressure, I'm going to end up losing a kidney no matter what. That is, if I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror. So, I guess I have to save someone's life. And you will," Sheila exclaimed. "What makes you so sure it'll be Karen?" I responded bluntly. "What? But you'll be a match, I know you will." "Yes, but there could be others who match too." "But why would you help strangers?" She stopped herself, her eyes narrowing. "Because strangers might actually be grateful. Strangers might actually appreciate me saving their loved one's life, instead of acting like I owe them because of some past connection. It would be poetic justice if my kidney went to another little girl. Honestly, I'd prefer to save a dad. A hardworking blue-collar dad with a family that values him. That's the kind of family I'd like to help." Kimberly covered her mouth and ran off. Sheila, clearly upset, asked, "Why are you acting like this? When did you turn into such an asshole? I thought I knew you. You know what? You cheated on me for 3 years, hit me with a surprise divorce, turned my kids against me, and I just walked away. Sure, I was angry, but I walked away. You dragged me back into your life. You keep making your problems my problems. You got me arrested. You abandoned me. You took me away from my daughter. So now you don't get to have any say about who I am and what I've become. You want me to help? Fine. Have the entire Woods clan show up the day after tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Every single one of them. If anyone's missing, I walk. And make sure you get all the releases signed so that if we come to an agreement, there's no waiting around for it to happen." I pulled an envelope from my pocket. "Kimberly has a doctor's appointment today. She needs to be there. This is a personal letter." "What kind of games are you playing?" she started to ask. "You'll find out the day after tomorrow," I said. As I turned and walked away, I sat at the conference table, feeling my stomach grumble. Mr. Hughes was seated beside me, along with a notary. I had considered using a video camera to record the meeting, but decided against it at the last minute, following my lawyer's advice. We had received word from the DA that the charges against both Sheila and me had been dropped. We were also advised not to involve the criminal justice system in our domestic disputes, which I found strange since I was clearly the victim in all of this. Sheila had been officially warned. Then they all came in looking like a sorry bunch. Jeff Woods, now over 40, and still a mystery to me why he married my ex-wife. Sheila, the one who caused all this mess, sat beside him, and they held hands across the table for me. Mike walked in next. I was surprised he wasn't deployed somewhere, but maybe he was on emergency family leave. His hair was cut high and tight, just like a proper naval aviator. Jason was there too. Finally, Kimberly came in last, arriving late and avoiding eye contact with me. "I want you all to know right from the start that the doctors have found not just one, but 2 matches for my kidney. One of them is an excellent match and the other is pretty good. I lied, letting that information sink in for a moment. The doctors are really annoyed that I'm insisting on deciding who gets my kidney. They think it should be purely a medical decision, but I believe it's better to give someone else at least a good chance. Why are you being such a hard-ass, Daryl? Jeff Woods asked. First of all, you can call me Mr. Gibson, and I have nothing to say to you right now, I replied firmly. All of you expect me to give up a part of myself and hand it over to someone I hardly know. You're trying to pressure me into making a huge sacrifice. Well, you've pushed me to this point, and yes, someone is going to get a kidney, but it doesn't have to be your little sister. So if you're here to tell me to do the right thing and save a life, guess what? I'm already doing that. Since I'm willing to make this sacrifice for a stranger, now it's your turn. Is this about money? Woods asked. Money? Just be quiet and let the former family talk. I couldn't believe this guy. First off, I want a divorce. When I saw their shocked expressions, I held up my hand to stop them. I don't mean from her, I said, gesturing towards Sheila. I mean from the three of you. What do you mean by divorce? Mike asked, confused. Even though there's no legal way to do this, you've all been huge disappointments to me. You haven't called, written, or reached out in any way until you needed something from me again. I could tolerate that before, but now you've crossed the line, and I want out. There's just one last thing all three of you have that I want back. Huh? Jason mumbled, clearly not following. My name, she's a Woods now, I said, pointing at Sheila. I want all three of you to change your last names to something else. Hughes began handing out the forms. Honestly, I don't care what name you choose, though I suspect it'll be Woods. If I might suggest something, Jason, I think Arnold would be a fitting last name for you. Jason's middle name was Benedict. If signing this gets Karen a kidney, I'll do it, Michael said as he immediately started signing the papers. You've turned into a real jerk, Dad. Since you're willing to make a sacrifice, why not start with something more personal? The rest of you give Michael and me a moment alone. Confused, the others slowly left the room. Kimberly placed a sympathetic hand on Michael's shoulder as she left, sensing what was about to happen. Michael, however, looked puzzled. Once they were all gone, he turned to me with a glare. You always taught me to do the right thing. I guess those were just empty words to you. Given how poorly you seem to have learned those lessons, I must have been a lousy teacher. People get divorced. It happens. Sometimes bad stuff happens and you just have to suck it up. Tough guy. His time in the military hadn't done much to improve his temper or attitude. I'm glad you feel that way. Bad stuff does happen, and it often comes from the actions of others. It's good to know that karma is just around the corner. Friends and family are supposed to look out for each other. So how do you square your military teamwork attitude with what happened to me? Mom asked us not to get involved. How considerate. So if a fellow officer asked you to do something immoral and wrong, you'd just go along with it. I opened my briefcase and took out a vial, a mirror, and a razor blade. Let's play a little game of don't ask, don't tell. I poured out a small amount of white powder onto the mirror and cut it into lines. Here. And what do you expect me to do with that? I assume it's wire powder. Assume whatever you want. It's the price you pay for my kidney. He flipped the mirror over, scattering the powder across the polished surface. Screw you. I'm not doing it. I don't believe you'd actually let her die. You'd be surprised at what I'm capable of these days, I replied calmly. The guilt is on you. See, I'm going to save a life. But you're the one choosing not to help your sister, which is your decision to make. Honestly, it doesn't shock me knowing how much family loyalty means to you. She's not wealthy, and she can't offer you anything in return. He looked like he was ready to jump across the table at me. Screw you. I love my sister, but I'm not ruining my career when I don't have to. Do you have any idea how hard I work to go from the ranks to flight officer? Yes, about a third of the time I spent trying to keep a family and marriage together. Go ahead, cry me a river, tough guy. Just give her the kidney. Why are you making this so damn hard? Why are you trying to hurt us? I just stared at him as he looked down at the powder spilled on the table. You're kind of a joke, you know that? Here you are, this big tough fighter pilot. Have you ever really thought about what that means? It means you're supposed to get in that jet and put your life on the line for a bunch of people back home that you don't even know. You're supposed to be willing to die whenever others need you to. No, I don't think that part of the job ever crossed your mind. You think it's just about taking out the bad guys because you can't even risk a sacrifice for someone you actually know. I guess it's all about the uniform and picking up girls, having people tell you how great you are. Screw you, Mom was right to leave you. Maybe not, but me, I'm gonna save a life. You, Mr. Big Bad Fighter Pilot, now you get to make the tough call. You might have thought it would be something like shooting down an airliner or starting a war. Nope, your real challenge is deciding whether a little girl lives or dies when you have the power to do something about it. No cheering crowds. No fellow officers patting you on the back or feeling sorry for you. Just a simple act for someone other than yourself, you selfish jerk. But the family will know. They'll know you had a choice and chose to back out, because you care more about your fancy uniform than your sister. Tell me, when she was little, just 2 years old and learning to talk, what did she call you? I saw the crack in his resolve. My Mickey, she called me Mickey. Hand me your damn poison, I'll do it. He motioned toward the half-empty vial. No, I replied, giving him the coldest stare I could. Now you can lick it off the table. Jason walked in alone, just as I'd asked, with a cautious expression. He had seen Michael after he left. Sit down, I instructed. You know, you're the biggest disappointment to me. You had a wife and kids when you did this to me. You should have known better if you really loved them. I paused. You do love them, don't you? I didn't want to assume. Yes, he spat out. So, you have some idea of how I felt. Or at least you should. Dad, he corrected himself quickly under my glare. Mr. Gibson, Mom was unhappy. She'd been unhappy for years. I placed the envelope on the table and slid it back and forth between my hands, watching his eyes track its movement. So, were those the years she was sneaking around with Jeff Woods behind my back? Or was it even earlier than that? Did she ever let me know she was unhappy? Sure. I noticed she seemed off for a few months, but she never said a word. Wouldn't you want Pamela to tell you if she was unhappy? Or if she didn't have the courage? Wouldn't you hope your kids might give you a heads up before you got blindsided? If your wife was seeing someone while you were away, wouldn't you want your son to clue you in? What do you want from me? An apology? I already said I was sorry. I'm still sorry. Yeah, you're sorry. But an apology is just words. I flicked the envelope with my finger, sending it spinning across the table. It caught a bit of air as it hit a stray breeze and landed in front of him. That's what I want from you. He opened the envelope cautiously. Inside was a key card with the Quality Inn logo on it. What's this? It's for a hotel room. Room 341. Inside, there's a nice, attractive young lady, disease-free, who's interested in meeting you. In fact, I think you should get to know her in the biblical sense. Actually, I'm insisting on it. And what's the point of this? Why are you playing these ridiculous games instead of just helping the very people who betrayed me? Let me tell you a story. There was once a young man, married, mind you, who held his father's marriage in his hands. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was one the father deeply valued. Like most marriages, it needed work and care. We both know how well that young man handled that responsibility. Now karma has come around, and it's my turn to have control over your marriage. If you really love your sister, you'll do whatever it takes to save her life. Even if I'm a complete jerk and decide to send the video, he flinched at that, to Pamela, you might still be able to fix things. You could explain how I forced you into a situation with an incredibly attractive woman. That might not end your marriage, especially if it's built on trust and honesty. Does she trust you? Does she take your word seriously? You might be able to patch things up, but it'll never be the same. Just like I'm not the same. You should enjoy it, though. Think of it as a belated birthday present. A thought crossed my mind at the last moment. Oh, hand over your cell phone. You see, I only rented. Is rented the right term? No, hired. Yes, I only hired her for 3 hours. And to give you a little extra motivation, since the charges against me have been dropped, I've got my boat back. So how much do you value your sister's life? I leaned back and let the cursing begin. After he started to calm down, I glanced at my watch. You've got 2 hours and 25 minutes left. Send in Kimberly. And don't forget to leave your cell phone. Kimberly walked in, looking like a beaten dog. Dad, Mr. Gibson, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never really put myself in your shoes. You were always the strong one. The one who disciplined us and took the hard hits. She almost choked on her words in stride. We thought you'd get over it quickly, and you seemed to. Then you started yelling and disappeared, and I just assumed you hated us. You got that last part right, I replied. She flinched. But I didn't think it would hurt you. Not like that. It did, and it still does. Do you know what the worst part of this whole situation is for me? She shook her head. It's that you came back. Not because you were sorry. Not because you missed me. Not because you realized you were wrong. But because you had to. She sat there, staring down at her hands. Is that why you scheduled the doctor's appointment for me to get an Assure implant? Assure was a permanent sterilization procedure. It involved placing 2 plugs in the fallopian tubes, causing scarring that prevented eggs from reaching the uterus. You took my future away from me, I said. That's not true, she whispered. Not technically, no. But you did take a future away from me. So I'm just taking a future away from you. You'll still meet someone, fall in love, have a career, hobbies, joys, and friends. Just no children, she sobbed. No, maybe this will help you appreciate family a bit more. Maybe Karen can be your surrogate daughter. She sat there quietly, still avoiding eye contact and staring at her hands. So that's what this is all about. Sacrifice. When the doctor explained the procedure, I felt numb. She told me I had to wait 3 days to be sure I was serious about it. The doctor also said that I needed a family member or someone I loved to drive me home afterward. Finally, she looked up at me, her face void of any emotion. Just a mask of the girl I once knew. I chose you instead. Father, I wish you would take this burden from me. But your will, not mine, be done. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Sheila was waiting for me outside the room after Kimberly left, looking like a shell of herself. Are you happy with yourself, tearing apart your own family? She asked, dripping with venom. Excuse me, I was on my boat heading to Bermuda. 7 years ago, I was thrown out of this family when every single one of you turned against me. And that justifies treating your own children so horribly? They aren't my children anymore. You made sure of that. Clearly, I failed as a father if they were capable of doing what they did to me. But I don't think they'll forget this lesson. Not one bit. So this is just revenge? Call it whatever you want. A wave of exhaustion suddenly hit me. The day had been incredibly draining, and I knew it wasn't over yet. Do you mind? I'm tired. Being an asshole takes a lot out of you. And it truly did. So is it our turn now? She asked, glaring at me. Sure, let's finish this up. Right on cue, Jimmy Boy walked in with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sheila, and she blew on it before giving him a smile that twisted the knife in my gut. She had built an entire life without me. Mr. Hughes entered the room as well, accompanied by the notary. He placed his folders down and took a seat next to me. This was my moment. Do you want to know the difference between you and me, Sheila? She took a sip of her coffee. I have a soul? Nice. You still have that sharp wit, I see. No sense of shame, but a soul. No. I was going to say that you still have all your good memories. You made your choices, had the kids, and everything turned out just fine for you. Meanwhile, all our shared memories were trashed for me. I had to question everything about my relationships with all of you. You had Kimberly, Jason, and Michael standing by your side. I was left out in the cold. Daryl, how many times do I have to say I'm sorry? The last few years of our marriage weren't filled with many happy memories for me. No, you were saving all your happiness for Jimmy Boy. Didn't bother to save any for me. You moved from one set of happy memories to another. I noticed Jeff wanted to say something, but he kept quiet, clenching his jaw. Maybe he was finally learning to keep his mouth shut. It doesn't matter. I can tell from the looks on our kids' faces that you're planning something awful. So let's get it over with, shall we? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Jeff, how's my wife? Enjoying your time with her? He stayed silent, just waiting. You know why people are drawn to married folks? If someone's even a little attractive, they catch the eye of single people. You're a prime example, Jeff. is because marriage smooths out the rough edges. People are like rocks in that way. I'd already done the work with Sheila and you decided to take her, Jeff. That's theft. You saw something nice and you took it. Are you saying you want her back? Jeff asked, clearly shocked. Oh no, it's like a piece of chewing gum. Once someone else has chewed it, you don't exactly want it back. Why would I want a faithless and deceptive woman back? Sheila went pale at that, but she stayed quiet. Just something to keep in mind for the future. I doubt she's got another 25 years in her. In about 14, just a heads up, been there, done that. Are the insults part of the deal? He asked. No, those are on the house. But back to my point, you didn't just take my wife. You took my entire life. Everything I had, everything I expected, past, present, future. You turned my whole world upside down and you didn't even bother to ask. I grabbed the 2 folders from Mr. Hughes. These are quitclaim deeds. One is for your house. You sign it over to me. Hughes cut in. He prepared these in case you felt like giving him a gift. I smiled and nodded in agreement. The other document is a quitclaim deed for all your belongings. What's chattel? Sheila asked. Hughes clarified. That means everything in your house. You're signing over all the contents of your home, your boat, and your cars to him? I continued. Your clothes, including the anniversary lingerie you bought, the box with the baby outfits, the photo albums, the trophies and diplomas. Sheila, even your grandmother's cast iron frying pan. Your favorite book. The bed where you made sweet love. The backyard where you entertained all your friends. All of it. I want it all. Here's how it works. You sign, we file the paperwork while you stay here, and you hand over the keys to everything. The PI will watch the house and take video to make sure you don't sneak in and steal any of my stuff. I'm not heartless. I'll let you pack 1 suitcase each, including Karen's, with clothes and any legal documents you need, like birth certificates and passports, but no marriage licenses. I've got plans for that little document. So this is about money, Woods scoffed. Did I ask for your 401k? Did I mention your stocks or cash? No. This is about your memories. This is your life. You took my life, so now I'm taking yours. Sheila had a focused look on her face as this conversation unfolded. Without a word, she opened her purse, took out a pen and asked, Where do I sign? Hughes's assistant had already marked the spots with sticky notes, and Sheila began signing and dating the documents. Wait, Jeff exclaimed. He can't do this. Selling a kidney is illegal. This isn't a sale. We're making no promises, Hughes replied, giving me a look of disgust. I think some lawyers take on sleazy clients just to feel morally superior once in a while. This is a simple request without any quid pro quo. Consider it restitution for past grievances. And what if we report this to the police? Jeff blustered. Don't be an idiot, Jim, Sheila snapped. If you do that, he won't be able to donate the kidney or he'll end up in jail and Karen will die. We already tried that route once. She shot me a look of disgust. This time it's our turn to be on the receiving end. The price is too high. We need to negotiate. I'm open to it, I cut in. What's the going rate for a little girl's life? Just curious. I tapped the file folders with my finger, but I know what my price is. Jim, sign the papers. I've had that house for 15 years. It has everything I've worked for my whole life. It's just a house. It's everything we have. I know. And it hurts a lot. All her birthday pictures, all her clothes, my things, my jewelry. Sheila looked at me, reached behind her neck, took off her gold chain and slammed it onto the paper. Here. She began twisting the rings off her fingers. Do you want my wedding rings too? I waved my hand dismissively at her. No, I'm good. I know exactly how much those things mean to you. She actually growled at me. Jeff grabbed her by the head, turning her to face him. Sheila, listen to me. He's just playing messed up games. He's not really going to go through with this. We can't show weakness now. He's just trying to tear us apart. Thank you, Captain Obvious. But what can we do about it? We can wait. We can hope he grows a conscience. We can try to find another match. We can't just throw everything away over this. You're not throwing everything away. I cut in. You still have your health. You still have each other. And you still have that oh-so-lucrative job you used to lure my wife into adultery. Sheila blushed and looked away in shame. so you'll be fine. Just the stuff will be gone. No deal, Jeff shouted at me. You need to come up with another price. Sheila, he's bluffing. He's bluffing, he yelled at me. Jim, he was sailing to Bermuda. He's filled with hate and spite. Jim, we can't take that chance with our daughter. She's not, he started. But then he stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished. I don't know what you were going to say, but don't say it. Her voice was precise, but her face showed how shaken she was. She turned to me with eyes full of hate. I hope you're satisfied, I sighed. Yes and no. For years, I convinced myself that you were just a soulless tramp who threw everything away for some money and a younger guy. But that also meant believing that the woman I thought I knew for 24 years was a complete lie and that I was a fool. It made me think you were just pretending all along. But when you picked up that pen and signed away everything, it reminded me of the woman I married. The one who made the right choices and truly cared about her family. It showed me that my judgment wasn't entirely wrong. So if there's even a piece of that Sheila left, maybe I share some of the blame. But just a piece. When it really mattered, you didn't give me a chance to fight for my family. That doesn't change the fact that, when it came down to choosing between stuff, I said with contempt and family, you made the right choice. The only good choice. But you need to live with the fact that you denied me that same choice. I didn't care about the house, the car, or half of the retirement fund. What I wanted was my family, and I wasn't given the chance to keep them because of you. I glanced at my watch. This has been enlightening, and it seems like you two have a lot to talk about. Unfortunately, your other daughter has an appointment, and now I have to drive her to it. Mr. Hughes can take care of things from here. My work here was done with those 2 words from Jeff Woods. The drive was silent. My mind kept replaying that last encounter. I realized that Sheila wasn't completely heartless. She was willing to make a tough decision for her daughter. But then I questioned myself. Was I just a hate-filled monster? Was I trying to get even, teach them a lesson, exercise my demons, or simply indulging in some twisted form of sadism? Unfortunately, there was room for all 4 theories, and only 2 of those motives were remotely justifiable. As we headed to the doctor's office, my phone beeped with a text. Jason had paid his price, and apparently he was crying like a little child. I sighed and remembered the days after the divorce. He had 7 years of regret ahead of him before we could even come close to being even. I steeled myself. The doctor's office was a typical OBGYN setup. Magazines about pregnancy were scattered around, and pictures of mothers holding adorable babies adorned the walls. The place was nicely decorated, with a corner set aside for children's toys. Naturally, there were pregnant women in the waiting room. Kimberly looked tense, her eyes darting around, trying to find a safe place to rest. Eventually, she just closed her eyes and curled up in her seat. I could hear her whispering to herself. Her knuckles were clenched so tightly they turned white. Memories I had avoided for 7 years suddenly flooded back. Kimberly used to love dolls and played with them until she was 13. In her teens, she transitioned to collecting artistic China dolls. I remembered when she broke up with Gary Dodson. He seemed like a nice boy, but when I asked her about it, she simply said he's not nice to kids. I also remembered the way she used to smile at me with that special daddy's girl smile. This was going to be unbearable for her. Kimberly Gibson, the receptionist, called out. Her hand clenched mine so tightly I could feel my bones grinding together. In a low, urgent voice, she said, "Promise me. Promise me you'll keep your word. Swear to me that this will erase all the pain I've caused you. Tell me that this isn't all for nothing. I don't care what the others do. Just swear to me. Swear to me that this is the end of it. Please just tell me I'm a good girl, Daddy." She broke down and started to cry. The receptionist watched for a moment, then quickly picked up the phone. I felt torn, unsure of what to do. I grabbed her hand with both of mine. What's going on here?" A woman in a white doctor's coat shouted as she walked in. She saw my pale face and my daughter, who likely looked even worse. I was told she had already made this decision. I'm not going to operate on her, not in this state, until I get a psychological profile from a psychologist stating she's mentally sound. We're done here, of course. Send me the bill, I replied in a gravelly voice as I helped Kimberly to her feet. No, Kimberly screamed. You have to do it. My sister, don't. You need to do it, she cried, nearly hysterical. I gently pulled her toward the door while the doctor muttered something about calling security. Daddy, this isn't my fault. I'm sorry. We can find another doctor. I swear I'll do it. Just give me some time. Shoo. I soothed her, feeling utterly broken. You know the thing about sacrifice? I barely managed to say. Sometimes it's enough just to be willing to do the hard thing. You've paid in full. In the car, she finally stopped crying. What now? She asked in a dull tone. Now I head to the hospital. There was no outburst of happiness. No smiles or joy. It seemed like neither of us had any emotion left to give. Moving like an old woman, she reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. Here, these are the name change forms. I filled them out and filed them before coming to the doctor's office. I don't deserve to be your daughter. And honestly, right now, I don't want to be your daughter. I took that in and I couldn't blame her. I deeply regret not taking you out of that doctor's office before the doctor refused to help us. You have no reason to believe me, but I was wrong. And yet we still have the scars, she replied. Yes, scars. Reminders of lessons learned. This is your second chance. When you have your own kids, make sure you raise them right. Make sure they don't repeat the mistakes we made. Start fresh. Help your kids do better than we did. We drove forward into whatever the future held. Epilogue. I was sitting in a cafe in St. Martin. That elusive mermaid still hadn't shown up, even after 10 years of searching. Still, I looked up and down the French beach. There were other consolations. An angry young man sat down across from me, uninvited. What can I do for you, son? I asked calmly. I'm not your son. No, you're not. I remember my boys. They turned out to be mostly good men, I suppose. Made some big mistakes, but they paid for them. In the end, they figured out what really matters, and that's all anyone can do. Want a drink? No, you're a hard man to track down. He continued to glare at me, but then his gaze shifted to more of an assessment, rather than an accusation. So, who's looking for me? My name is Harold Weiss. He didn't offer his hand and fell silent. I extended mine instead. Okay, Mr. Weiss. You obviously know who I am, though I'm not sure how. So, how can I help you? He hesitated at first, but then finally shook my hand. I need a favor, a big one, and only you can do it. Mr. Weiss, I've never seen you before in my life. Maybe you should start by telling me your story. He sighed and motioned for the waiter, waiting until his drink arrived. This is just too strange. I expected someone more what? More hateful. Time and the whole Karen incident had burned a lot of the hate and bitterness out of me. He gathered his thoughts when I didn't respond. I married Kimberly Arnold. You probably remember her as Kimberly Gibson. I knew her by both names. She showed me the name change forms, though I never really thought of her as an Arnold. Kimberly disappeared after I donated the kidney. In fact, I did it on the same day I confronted the family. Eventually, Sheila pressured Jeff into signing the forms, although judging by their faces, it must have been an ugly fight. Sheila believed Kimberly might have gone off to harm herself, but I didn't think so. I figured she was working through a lot of issues. Yes, I stayed in their house while I recovered. For the first 3 days, a nurse looked after me, and I spent my time snooping into the lives of strangers. They seemed happy in the photos, but it was clear I wasn't part of that life. Once I started feeling better, I spent my time going through their files. Any photo of Mr. and Mrs. Woods went straight into the fireplace. If the photo included Karen, I left it alone. Any picture of a relative I didn't recognize got destroyed. I burned all of his trophies, diplomas, toys, and her frilly undergarments, reducing them to ash and twisted metal. Apparently, Mr. Woods used to be quite the high school baseball player. I thought about destroying all of her clothes, too, but 2 things stopped me. First, I remembered my mother. Her church dress, apron, and visiting suit were major memories for me. Second, there was a picture at the bottom of her dresser. It was of the 5 of us at Disney World, back when we were a happy family. I spared the clothes in honor of my mother and for Karen. I spent the rest of the month thinking about the future while finishing off their cases of wine and a special bottle of 25-year-old Lafroig in a wooden case. Honestly, it just tasted like scotch to me. When I needed some cash, I pawned one of her pieces of jewelry. I wasn't about to touch my own savings. His clothes, both cars, her remaining jewelry, and a few heirlooms I knew she cherished were donated to the National Kidney Foundation. I left the receipts on the kitchen table. This wasn't about money. I decided I wouldn't ruin the life of a little girl who had done nothing wrong except be related to the wrong people. When I noticed her swing in the yard, I saw a small gap in the bushes. There was a tiny headstone with Frodo scratched on it, surrounded by a circle of rocks and a withered flower. No, burning this place to the ground might have been an option if it were just Sheila and Jeff. But that little memorial was a gift I could give to a daughter I'd never get to know. So I called Hughes and had him reverse the paperwork. Why did I wait a month? Well, I wanted them to go through the hassle of setting up a new household, making deposits, buying furniture, and getting new appliances. Sure, it was petty by then, but while Kimberly and Sheila had shown some level of remorse, I felt like Jeff deserved a little something extra, and recovery takes time. Since Sheila had proven she still had some sensitivity left, I left her little notes. In their photo albums, I wrote, "She's a beautiful girl, too bad I never knew her." I also tucked a few other notes where she'd find them over the years. But in the end, I was finished with this family. Again, illness, moving, and even a fire. All these things put a strain on a marriage. They experienced the equivalent of all three at once. Let's see if good old Jeff could keep things together when the storm hits, not just when the sun is shining. I wished him no luck at all. Now, I had this young man I'd never met before asking me for a favor. Kim was in therapy for a long time. He shot another glare my way. "She's better now. She said you were the toughest son of a witch on the planet." He waited for me to respond, but I didn't. Anyway, when we started dating, she made sure I understood the meaning of sacrifice. He watched me again, but I still had no idea what he was getting at. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, so she told me right away that any children we had would carry the Gibson name. It wasn't up for negotiation. "So have you had any kids?" I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. "Greta and Alois Gibson." She let me choose their names. "He's less than a year old. And where do I fit into all this? My brother just passed away, and he didn't have any children, though he was married. I want to keep the family name going, but my wife refuses. I think you're the only person who can convince her to change her mind. You're my last hope." I thought it over as I finished my Carib lager. "Can I see your phone?" I asked. He handed it to me. "Just hold down number 1. That's her cell." I gave him an approving nod. "Good, that's how it should be." I pressed the button. Took a moment to connect. "Hi, sweetie. How are you?" Her voice was warm and affectionate. She was happy to hear from him. I remembered when someone used to feel that way about me. I tried to sound gruff, though it wasn't easy. "You still don't seem to learn your lessons very well." She gasped. "Duh, Mr. Gibson. What's going on?" "What lesson? How did you get this phone?" She sounded stunned. "The lesson was about sacrifice and grace. Your husband came down here to give me a piece of his mind about how I treated you. I think you have a good man there. Took a lot of guts to risk so much for this. Family goes both ways. Can you consider giving him the honor of passing on his family name to your children?" Her tone turned light and breezy, though it felt a bit forced. "You know what? I think I'll keep him." There was a brief silence. "Anything else?" "Yes." I felt something unclench in my chest and my voice came out hoarse. "I'm sorry, and I'd like to see my grandchildren, if you'll let me." There was a long pause, almost as painful as the 7 years I'd spent in isolation. "I think Gibson would make a perfectly good middle name. What do you think?" Another pause followed, this one slightly less tense. "When can you come?" It felt like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying suddenly lifted. Kimberly had indeed learned about sacrifice and grace. Everyone deserves a second chance, even me.